Why has humanity always believed the unseen matters? Thousands of years before laboratories, before psychology, before neuroscience, before the modern languages of science and philosophy, human beings were already asking remarkable questions. Can one person's thoughts affect another? Why do some encounters leave us inspired, while others leave us unsettled? Why does envy seem capable of poisoning relationships, while compassion appears capable of healing them? These questions did not belong to one civilization. They appeared almost everywhere. In the deserts of the Middle East, along the rivers of India, across the mountains of China, throughout Africa, in ancient Greece, and across the Americas. Among indigenous cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, different languages, tongues, different symbols, different stories. Yet, humanity repeatedly returned to one profound idea: that something invisible passes between us. Some traditions described blessings, others warned of curses, some spoke of prayer, while others spoke of intention. Some believed unseen spiritual beings could influence human life. Others understood these experiences through symbolism, morality, or the inner workings of the mind. The explanations differed, but the question remained remarkably similar. How do human beings influence one another? What is the nature of consciousness? And what, if anything, exists beyond what we can perceive with our five senses? For centuries, these questions were explored through religion, philosophy, ritual, mythology, and personal experience. Today, they are also examined through psychology, anthropology, neuroscience, and other scientific disciplines. Each perspective offers part of the conversation. None claims every answer. This inquiry is not an attempt to prove one worldview over another. Instead, it is an invitation to explore why so many cultures, often without contact between them, developed similar ideas about intention, perception, and unseen influence. Why did civilizations separated by continents create symbols that seem to echo one another? What experiences inspired these beliefs? Were they observing psychological patterns, social dynamics, spiritual realities, or something else? Were they using the language available to describe experiences that still challenge our understanding today? Perhaps the most fascinating question is not whether any single belief is literally true. Perhaps it is why humanity has never stopped asking these questions. As we begin this journey, we will look at history, culture, psychology, philosophy, and spiritual traditions with curiosity and care. Some ideas are supported by historical records or scientific research. Others belong to the realms of faith, symbolism, or personal experience. Each has shaped how millions of people understand themselves and the world around them. Because beneath every ancient symbol, every whispered prayer, every protective amulet, every sacred ritual, and every philosophical debate lies a deeper mystery. Not simply whether invisible forces exist, but what it means to be conscious, what it means to intend, to perceive, to influence, and ultimately, what it means to be human. So before we ask whether the evil eye exists or what people have meant by black magic, we must begin with the question that may be larger than both. Why has humanity across thousands of years and countless civilizations been so deeply convinced that the unseen matters? Perhaps the answers lie not in one culture, nor one religion, or one scientific theory, but in the conversation that has been unfolding between them for millennia. And that is where our journey begins. Yet, among all the symbols humanity created, one appears again and again and again, across continents that never shared maps, across civilizations separated by oceans, across languages that never shared words. A single image continued to emerge, an eye. Sometimes carved into stone, sometimes painted onto homes, sometimes worn as jewelry, sometimes whispered about only in stories. Its meaning changed from culture to culture. Its appearance changed throughout history, but its purpose remained remarkably consistent: protection. But why? Why would so many civilizations create a symbol intended to guard against unseen harm? What experience led generations of people to believe that another person's gaze, their envy, their resentment, or their silent intentions could somehow influence another life? Was the evil eye itself ever believed to possess power? Or was it always symbolic of something much deeper? Perhaps humanity wasn't afraid of an eye at all. Perhaps it was warning us about something invisible that the eye represented, something far more difficult to see. And perhaps, before we can understand the symbol, we first need to understand the emotion behind it. Envy. Not simple admiration, not healthy ambition, but the painful desire to see another person lose what they have. It is one of humanity's oldest emotions, one that has inspired betrayal, violence, war, and the collapse of relationships throughout history. Could this universal human experience be the true origin of the evil eye? Or were our ancestors trying to describe something they felt, but could not fully explain? To answer that question, we have to travel back thousands of years, back to the earliest civilizations, back to the first written records, back to the moment history first opened its eyes, to what would become one of humanity's most endearing symbols. Long before the rise of Rome, before the pyramids had weathered the centuries, before philosophy flourished in Greece, people were already speaking about a mysterious danger. Not an invading army, not famine, not dis-ease, but something believed to pass silently from one human being to another. Ancient texts from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and later many other cultures contain references to beliefs about harmful envy, protective symbols, or the effects of malicious attention, although each tradition understood these ideas in its own way. The names differed, the rituals differed, the explanations differed, yet one pattern remained. Human beings believed that envy mattered. If the evil eye was humanity's warning about the destructive power of envy, another question naturally follows. What happens when harmful intention is no longer accidental, but deliberate? Across history, people have feared more than jealousy. They have feared intention directed with purpose, not a passing emotion, but a conscious decision to bring about harm. This idea appears in many cultures, though it takes different forms. Some traditions spoke of curses. Others described rituals intended to influence unseen forces. Some believed spiritual beings could be invoked. Others understood these practices as symbolic expressions of hatred, revenge, or the psychological power of belief. The names changed, the customs changed, the explanations changed. Yet one pattern continued to appear. Human beings believed intention mattered, whether expressed through a whispered blessing or a heartfelt prayer, or a ritual believed to cause harm. Cultures across the world repeatedly return to the same question. Can human intention influence another person's life? History offers many different answers. Religions interpret it through their own sacred teachings. Anthropologists examine it as a part of culture and tradition. Psychologists explore how belief, expectation, suggestion, and social influence shape human experience. Science continues to investigate the remarkable ways our thoughts, emotions, and relationships affect health and behavior, while questions about supernatural influence remains matters of faith, philosophy, and personal conviction rather than scientific consensus. Perhaps that is why this mystery has endured for so long. Not because humanity agreed on the explanation, but because humanity never stopped asking the question. And that brings us to one of history's most misunderstood ideas. Not because of what it claims, but because of what it reveals about the human search to understand intention itself. Few phrases evoke more fascination or more misunderstanding than black magic. In books and films, it is often portrayed as dark rituals, mysterious symbols, and supernatural power. Historically, however, the picture is far more complex. The term black magic has never meant exactly the same thing across cultures or throughout history. In some traditions, it referred to practices believed to direct harm toward another person. In others, it became a label applied to unfamiliar religious customs or rival belief systems. And in still others, it served as a warning about the ethical use of knowledge, intention, and power. Whatever the interpretation, one idea appears again and again. Intention matters. And perhaps that is the deeper mystery we are all really exploring. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question, not whether rituals work, but why intention has always been treated as morally significant. If there is one mystery that quietly weaves through every chapter of this story, it is not the evil eye. It is not black magic. It is consciousness. For thousands of years, humanity has searched for words to describe the invisible dimension of experience. Not merely what we see, but the one who sees. Not merely what we think, but the one who is aware of thought itself. Every civilization has wrestled with this mystery. Who are we? What is awareness? Why does consciousness exist at all? These questions have inspired philosophers, mystics, theologians, poets, and scientists alike. Yet, despite centuries of inquiry, consciousness remains one of the deepest unsolved questions. Neuroscience has revealed extraordinary insights into the brain, its networks, electrical activity, chemistry, and remarkable capacity for perception, memory, and emotion. But many researchers acknowledge that a profound question remains. How does subjective experience arise? How does a universe of neurons and electrical signals give rise to the feeling of being you? This challenge is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. It does not suggest that science has failed. Rather, it reminds us that some questions remain open, inviting continued exploration. Long before modern neuroscience, spiritual traditions approached these mysteries through different lenses. Some described consciousness as a gift from God. Others spoke of soul, spirit, mind, awareness, pure being. Some traditions viewed consciousness as something individual. Others saw it as participating in a greater reality that connects all life. These are philosophical and spiritual perspectives, not conclusions established by science. Yet across cultures, a remarkable pattern appears. Humanity has repeatedly sensed that there is more to awareness, more than immediate sensory experience. Could this shared intuition explain why so many cultures developed practices such as meditation, contemplation, prayer, fasting, and silent reflection? Not because they agreed on what consciousness is, but because they believed it was worth exploring. And perhaps that brings us back to the questions that began this journey. When people spoke of blessings, what did they believe was being transmitted? When they feared curses, what did they believe could be affected? When they prayed, what did they hope was listening? When they meditated, what were they hoping to discover? Different traditions offer different answers. Some speak of divine relationships, some of spiritual beings, some of the transformative power of disciplined attention. Others point to psychology, community, and the way beliefs shape perception, behavior, and resilience. Perhaps the value of these questions lies not only in the answers we propose, but in the search itself. Because whether we approach consciousness through neuroscience, through philosophy, through religion, through meditation, or through personal experience, we are all standing before the same mystery. The mystery that every generation inherits. The mystery that no civilization has fully solved. Perhaps consciousness is not merely another subject in this inquiry. Perhaps it is the landscape upon which every other question unfolds. The evil eye, black magic, prayer, blessings, intuition, the third eye, and spiritual warfare. Each of these ideas asks, in its own way, whether human beings participate in a reality that extends beyond immediate perception. Whether that reality is understood through science, spirituality, philosophy, or symbolism remains a matter of ongoing exploration. But one truth seems to unite them all. Human beings have never stopped searching for meaning beyond appearances. And perhaps that is what consciousness has always invited us to do. Not to rush toward certainty, but to cultivate the humility to ask better questions. Because every discovery begins the same way, with wonder. And that wonder now leads us to another question. If consciousness shapes how we experience reality, can it also shape how we live within it? Years and years, people across cultures have answered that question through practices that sought not to control others, but to transform themselves. Through prayer, meditation, blessing, compassion, disciplined attention. Could these practices reveal another side of intention, one directed toward healing, wisdom, and human flourishing? That is where our journey continues. If intention can wound, can it also heal? It is a question that echoes through history. Long before modern medicine, before psychology, before neuroscience, people across cultures turned toward practices they believed could restore balance, bring comfort, or invite healing. Prayer, blessings, meditation, acts of compassion, sacred rituals. Though these traditions differed in language and belief, many shared a common conviction: the inner life matters. Some believed healing came through divine grace. Others spoke of harmony with nature. Some emphasized disciplined awareness. Others pointed to love, forgiveness, or service to others. The explanations varied, but the direction was remarkably similar. Rather than using intention to control, they sought to transform. Perhaps that distinction is more important than it first appears. History contains countless stories of people who believed that they had been changed, not through force, but through kindness. A compassionate word spoken at the right moment, a sincere prayer offered in times of despair. The quiet presence of someone who refused to abandon hope. These moments may not always fit neatly into scientific measurement, yet few would deny their power to shape human lives. Modern psychology also reminds us that relationships matter. Supportive communities strengthen resilience. Compassion reduces isolation. Hope can influence how people cope with adversity. Practices such as meditation have been associated in research with benefits for attention, emotional regulation, and stress reduction. Although their effects vary amongst individuals, these findings do not prove every spiritual claim, nor do they diminish the value that many people find in spiritual practice. Instead, they invite a broader question. Why have so many traditions discovered that cultivating compassion, gratitude, forgiveness, and inner stillness can profoundly influence the way people experience life? Perhaps because intention is never expressed in isolation, every thought shapes perception, every perception influences action, and every action touches another life. Whether we understand this through psychology, through spirituality, through philosophy, or through everyday human experience, our inner world continually reaches outward. Perhaps that is why nearly every wisdom tradition encourages the same qualities. Not fear, not domination, but integrity, humility, patience, compassion, love. Could these be more than moral ideals? Could they also represent practical ways of shaping how we relate to ourselves, to one another, and to the world? If harmful intention has the power to divide, perhaps compassionate intention has the power to restore. Not because it erases suffering, but because it changes how suffering is met. And perhaps that is one of the greatest mysteries of all. Human beings possess the extraordinary capacity to influence one another, sometimes through words, sometimes through actions, sometimes simply through presence. Yet another mystery still remains. Throughout history, many cultures have claimed that human perception itself can change, that beneath ordinary awareness lies another way of seeing. Some called it intuition, some called it insight, some spoke of an inner eye, a symbol that has appeared again across civilizations for thousands of years. Could these traditions have been pointing toward a deeper dimension of perception? Or is the third eye simply a powerful metaphor for self-awareness and discernment? That question leads us to one of history's most enduring symbols, the third eye. Throughout history, another symbol quietly appears, not one that looks outward, but one that points within. The third eye. It has appeared in sacred art, ancient philosophies, meditative traditions, and mystical writings for thousands of years. Unlike the evil eye, which many traditions associated with harmful attention directed toward another, the third eye has often symbolized something very different: awareness, insight, discernment, the ability to perceive beyond appearances. Across cultures, it has been described in many different ways. In many Hindu traditions, the third eye is associated with Agnya Chakra, a symbol of wisdom, intuition, and inner perception. In many Buddhist traditions, awakened awareness is cultivated through mindfulness, compassion, and direct observation of experience. Other mystical and esoteric traditions have used the third eye as a metaphor for expanded consciousness or spiritual insight. These traditions do not all teach the same thing, yet they share a remarkable theme. The deepest journey is not outward, it is inward. Long before telescopes revealed distant galaxies, human beings like the Dogon tribe were exploring other universes. The landscape of the mind, the nature of awareness, the mystery of perception itself. Today, Modern neuroscience approaches these questions from a different direction. Scientists study how the brain constructs perception, how attention shapes experience, how memory influences what we notice, and how consciousness gives rise to our awareness of the world. The pineal gland, once surrounded by centuries of philosophical speculation, is now understood primarily as an endocrine gland involved in regulating melatonin and our sleep-wake cycles. Some spiritual traditions continue to regard it symbolically as connected to intuition or expanded awareness. These perspectives arise from different ways of understanding human experience. One is rooted in biological research, the other in spiritual symbolism and contemplative practice. Perhaps the most interesting question is not whether one replaces the other, but what each can teach us. Because every moment of our lives is filtered through perception, two people can witness the same event, yet leave with entirely different memories. The same words can inspire one person and wound another. The world or the way it is perceived. Psychology tells us that expectation, attention, emotion, and past experience shapes perception in powerful ways. Meditative traditions have long suggested that learning to observe the mind can transform how we respond to life. Though they speak of different languages, both invite us to examine the way we see. Perhaps that is the true invitation of the third eye. Not supernatural vision, but clear vision. The ability to recognize fear without becoming consumed by it. To notice envy without allowing it to grow. To observe anger before it becomes action. To question assumptions. To cultivate wisdom rather than impulse. To become aware of the stories we tell ourselves about the world. If the evil eye became a symbol of harmful perception, perhaps the third eye became a symbol of awakened perception. One warns us about how we look at others, and the other asks us to examine how we look within. And perhaps that is where the two symbols quietly meet, because every act of intention, whether compassionate or destructive, begins with perception. How we interpret the world, how we understand ourselves, how we choose to respond. For thousands of years, philosophers have suggested that wisdom begins with self-knowledge. Many spiritual traditions have echoed the same insight. Modern psychology also reminds us that greater self-awareness can foster emotional regulation, empathy, and healthier relationships. Different paths, a similar invitation. Know yourself. Because perhaps the greatest discoveries are not always made by looking farther into the universe, but by looking more honestly into ourselves. And that raises another question. If awareness can transform how we see, can it also transform how we live? Across history, many traditions have described life as more than a physical journey. They have spoken of an inner struggle, a conflict between fear and courage, selfishness and compassion, despair and hope. Some have called it the battle for the soul. Others, the discipline of the mind. Still others, spiritual warfare. That is where our journey now leads. Few ideas have inspired more fascination or more misunderstanding than the phrase spiritual warfare. For some, it brings to mind angels and demons, light and darkness, an unseen conflict between the physical world. Within many religious traditions, including Christianity, Islam, and others, spiritual warfare is understood as a genuine struggle involving unseen spiritual realities. Other traditions describe it differently. Some emphasize the conflict between wisdom and ignorance. Others speak of attachment and liberation. Some focus on the continual effort to cultivate compassion over hatred, humility over pride, or truth over illusion. Psychology offers yet another perspective. It explores the inner conflicts that shape our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and relationships. Different explanations, different world views, yet perhaps a shared observation. Human beings experience inner conflict every day, fear or courage, resentment or forgiveness, despair or hope, selfishness or compassion. Every civilization has attempted to understand this struggle. Some called it temptation, some called it ego, some called it karma, some spoke of sin, others described conditioning, unconscious habits, or cognitive patterns. The language changes, the experience remains deeply familiar. Perhaps the battlefields is not only somewhere beyond us. Perhaps it also unfolds within us. Every decision begins with a thought. Every thought shapes perception. Perception influences action. Action becomes habit. Habits shape character. And character quietly shapes the world around us. Could this be one reason so many wisdom traditions encourage practices such as prayer, meditation, self-examination, gratitude, confession, contemplation, service, and compassion? Not because these practices erase every hardship, but because they help transform the person who faces it. Modern psychology similarly suggests that cultivating resilience, emotional awareness, healthy relationships, and purposeful reflection can influence how people respond to life's challenges. These perspectives arise from different frameworks, yet each point toward an important truth. The quality of our inner life matters. History also reminds us that societies are influenced by more than laws and institutions. They are shaped by the accumulated choices of individuals. Acts of generosity, acts of cruelty, truth, deception, justice, indifference. The battle between these forces is not only found in ancient stories, it unfolds in ordinary moments, in homes, in workplaces, on social media, in the quiet conversations we have with ourselves. Perhaps spiritual warfare is not always dramatic. Perhaps it begins with the small choices that slowly define a life. Will fear decide for us, or will wisdom? Will resentment grow, or compassion? Will we become more divided or more deeply connected? And perhaps the most important question is not simply whether unseen influences exist. It is this: what kind of influence do we choose to become? Because every word we speak, every action we take, every intention we cultivate becomes part of the world someone else experiences. Some traditions would describe that as participating in a spiritual reality. Others would describe it as shaping culture, relationships, and the human mind. Either way, our lives leave an imprint. Perhaps that is the deepest meaning of spiritual warfare. Not merely resisting darkness, but actively cultivating light. Not merely avoiding hatred, but choosing to love. Not merely seeking power, but developing wisdom. Not merely asking what influences us, but asking, what influence will we become? And if our inner life shapes the world around us, how have civilizations throughout history sought to protect and strengthen that inner life? The answers may surprise us. Despite their differences, many traditions return to remarkably similar practices: prayer, meditation, integrity, community, compassion, humility, healthy boundaries. Not as superstitions, but as disciplines intended to strengthen the human spirit, cultivate character, and orient life toward what each tradition understands as truth and goodness. That is where our journey now continues. If humanity believed that intention mattered, then another question naturally followed. How do we protect ourselves? The answers are surprisingly consistent. Not identical, but remarkably similar. Across continents, across religions, across philosophies, people developed practices intended to strengthen the inner life. Prayer, meditation, acts of compassion, integrity, gratitude, forgiveness, community, self-discipline, healthy boundaries. The words differ, the rituals differ, the beliefs differ, yet again and again, humanity returns to the same direction. Turn inward. Strengthen the character. Cultivate awareness. Live with intention. Perhaps that is one of history's most overlooked discoveries. Protection was not always understood as building walls around ourselves. Often, it began by transforming the person within those walls. In Christianity, believers are encouraged to cultivate faith, love, forgiveness, and prayer. In Buddhism, mindfulness, compassion, and freedom from attachment are central. In Hindu traditions, disciplines such as meditation, devotion, and self-realization are emphasized. Indigenous traditions around the world often include ceremony, gratitude, reverence for nature, and communal responsibility. These practices are diverse, yet many encourage similar qualities: humility, integrity, compassion, presence. And why? Perhaps because every tradition recognized something profoundly human. Fear narrows perception, Anger clouds judgment. Envy isolates. Hatred consumes, but love opens. Gratitude steadies. Compassion connects. Awareness creates choice. Modern psychology echoes parts of this wisdom through a different language. Research suggests that supportive relationships, emotional regulation, gratitude, purpose, and mindfulness can strengthen resilience and improve well-being. These findings do not validate every spiritual tradition, nor do they dismiss them. Instead, they remind us that caring for our inner lives has measurable effects on how we experience the world and relate to others. Perhaps protection begins long before we encounter difficulty. Perhaps it begins with the habits we cultivate every day, the conversations we have with ourselves, the thoughts we repeatedly entertain, the people we choose to become. History is filled with symbols of protection, amulets, sacred prayers, blessings, protective gestures, holy water, incense, sacred texts, ceremonies. To some, these are profound expressions of faith. To others, they are cultural traditions, rich with meaning. Their significance depends on the beliefs and practices of the communities that hold them. Perhaps the most universal form of protection cannot be carried in hand. It must be cultivated within: a clear mind, an honest heart, a disciplined character. The courage to seek truth even when it is uncomfortable, the humility to admit what we do not know, and the wisdom to respond rather than simply react. Perhaps this is why so many traditions encourage us not merely to seek protection, but to become the kind of person who is less easily ruled by fear, resentment, or hatred, because whatever conclusions we reach about unseen realities, one truth remains remarkably consistent. The condition of our inner life shapes the quality of our outer life. It influences our relationships, our decisions, our communities, and ultimately, the legacy we leave behind. Perhaps true protection has never been about escaping the world. Perhaps it has always been about learning how to move through it with greater wisdom, greater compassion, and greater awareness. After thousands of years of questions, perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether unseen influences exist, but whether we have truly come to know ourselves. For only in knowing ourselves can we begin to recognize what is familiar, what is foreign, and what we choose to welcome into our minds, our hearts, and our lives. And perhaps that is where the journey truly begins.